The following short stories are modern retellings of some of Australia's most fearsome and fascinating mythological creatures. If you find them interesting, I encourage you to search out stories about these creatures in their original form. I hope you enjoy. On to the video. From the cave's entrance, the Nadubi could make out the warm glow of Juniper's flames. Had she not expected to find her, she thought they could have been mistaken for a campfire. What a human idea. A campfire. Those creatures were so fascinating in their limitations. The Nadubi made no sound as she went further in. Her bare feet so silent, you could be forgiven for thinking she glided. Juniper sat with her back to her. The lifeless body of her last mate cradled in her lap. She caressed his face and sang to him. The Nadubi hardly noticed that she relaxed as she got closer. The rain outside now sounding so distant as she was swaddled in Juniper's warmth. I'm surprised to find you here, of all places. The Nadubi announced herself. An old power play of sorts, designed to throw the unwitting party off balance. But Juniper didn't jolt. Oh, she didn't even squeak. She just stared at the dead man in her lap and quietly finished her song. Should I be somewhere else? Juniper replied finally. The Nadubi looked to the dead man's bloodied face. If she had to guess, he had beaten himself to death with some sort of rock. Perhaps not at the scene of your crime. Juniper winced. You don't understand anything. Sure I don't. Juniper kissed the man's head and turned to face the Nadubi, the warrior's bare red skin looking more burgundy in her firelight. Why are you here? Is there a good reason, or did you just wake up feeling petty today? The Nadubi toyed with the idea of getting the last word. But Juniper, even for the aberration that she was right about one thing. It would have been petty. She felt the weight of the stone dagger strapped to her thigh. It was more than just an urge to try and take Juniper's head. But she had to grunt and remind herself that it wouldn't be possible. There's a group of humans that have set up camp nearby. Juniper looked to the dead man. So, I'm not hurting anyone. The Nadubi followed her gaze. We both know you will. Juniper furrowed her brow. So why are you here then? Shouldn't you be down at the campsite doing your job? The Nadubi averted her eyes. In her head, she hadn't expected this to be a discussion. I don't want to anymore. Don't want to? Juniper asked. You know the rules. Who did this temptress think that she was? Talking to her about rules. Well, times have changed ever since the Nadubi faded, catching herself for letting her anger get the best of her. The Mokoi. Ever since the Mokoi, Juniper finished. Yes. The Nadubi leaned against the cave wall. We can't very well warn the humans anymore if they can't even see us. It's just turned into slaughter. And the Nadubi braced herself for a verbal counter. She left herself open to it. What do you mean you are no stranger to slaughter? Was the hypothetical comeback she'd expected. But Juniper just said, so why don't you kill him instead? The Mokoi? Juniper's silence was deafening. The bunyip. The Nadubi caught her train of thought. The wind howled outside as the storm got worse. The rain sounded like an avalanche. We tried. How many Nadubi took part in the attack? The Nadubi's voice cracked. All of us. Juniper faced her, her sun-like eyes understanding. And how many came back? The Nadubi squeezed her eyes shut and pinched the bridge of her nose. It's unsightly for a warrior to tear up. Sometimes empty phrases like, I'm sorry, or I understand, just aren't enough. So Juniper's silence was the closest thing to a condolence that she could give. Ugh. So will you leave or not? The Nadubi got back on point. Juniper held the corpse just a little tighter. Fine, the Nadubi spat. She plucked a needle-like spine from her satchel and went to leave. You know, you don't have to do this anymore, Juniper called after her. It's over. You can't keep holding to the old way now that Kiamprati has destroyed it. You can leave. Forge a new path. Even allow yourself to have a name. The Nadubi stopped. The ancient warrior choking back tears. Her sisters. All her sisters. I don't need advice from a temptress. She went out into the storm. And by the time it had cleared, the campfire would be out. The men, women, and children would all be dead. Because the Nadubi have one rule, even if now humans are incapable of knowing it. The Nadubi are a race of warrior spirits that can be found all over Australia. Mostly female, the Nadubi appear as red-skinned, semi-nude, demon-like creatures. However, instead of horns, their bodies grow needle-like spines that function as the Nadubi's primary weapon against humans. It should be noted that even though they have red skin and glowing eyes, these creatures are not inherently evil, nor are they demonic. In fact, unlike many other creatures, the Nadubi share no relation to the bunyip in any way. The Nadubi act as the guardsmen of the southern land. Their role is to prevent humans from entering areas of spiritual significance, and, more importantly, areas where dark spirits and evil creatures roam. The Nadubi do this as they believe that any kill made by an evil creature makes it more powerful. And they can't simply go and kill the creature or spirit in question, as Nadubi are forbidden from physically interacting with creatures other than themselves and humans. The Nadubi have one rule. Do not enter the domain of dark spirits or evil creatures, on penalty of death. The original arrangement was, a Nadubi would give a group of trespassers one warning, and if they did not comply, the Nadubi would kill them. The kicker is, regular humans are incapable of hearing or seeing Nadubi. This is something that only practitioners of magic could do. It is believed that this originated as a sort of incentive for tribes or groups to remain spiritually connected to the rest of the world, and to never lose faith in the greater powers. Always, on pain of death, keep a spiritual leader nearby, for fear of angering a Nadubi. If a Nadubi decides to kill you, it plucks out one of its needle-like spines and stabs you with it. Once stabbed, you will have 1 day to remove the spine, or suffer a death wherein your internal organs liquefy. The problem again, though, is that only a spiritual man can see and interact with an Nadubi's spine. Thus, only they can remove it. So, what is the issue exactly? Why is it now that an encounter with a Nadubi is a death sentence? Well, when the sorcerer that would become known as the Mokoi went on a killing spree in the Bunyip's name, the magical practitioners who he was instructed to kill just so happened to be every single tribe's magic men. When the Mokoi killed all the other sorcerers of the land, not only did he doom himself to forever be cursed, but he also unwittingly sentenced hundreds to die at the hands of the Nadubi. A race of spirits so entrenched in their traditions that they could not change their ways, even in the face of redundancy. It is said that, in a desperate attempt to undo what had been done, the Nadubi executed an all-out attack on the Bunyip. The Nadubi numbered more than the stars themselves, and the Bunyip was but one. Now only a dozen or so Nadubi remain. Warriors without an order. Now more murderers than guardsmen. Crippled by their one rule. Taken from the journal of explorer Philip Parker King. March 12th, 1818. Arnhem Land. The big river in the Never Never. That's what that idiot, Captain Cadell, had told me to look for. But did he give me coordinates? Perhaps a geographer? Of course not. That stuffy bureaucrat just wants a slab of land to pass the defecate of a capital idea, Palmerston, through the lower intestine of his vapid brain and out onto the red dirt for all to see. And as it cooks in the abominable heat with the rest of us, I only hope the smell makes him choke. But I don't think I'll include that in my official report. This big river I've been sent to find is supposed to be surrounded by dense bushland, fertile soil and the sort. Cadell wants to cut it all down so that he can finally found his capital city fever dream. And whilst I've never been one to stand in the way of progress, I can't help but feel this plan of his is a tad short-sighted. Who would want to live up here? Now, yes, we've got a settlement or two in Arnhem Land, but a capital city? What industry would sustain it? How could it even be accessed? Does Cadell expect prospectors to circumnavigate the damned country just to get to his beloved Palmerston? I digress. The 2nd of April, 1818. After weeks of travel, I think I finally found a suitable candidate. I found a body of water downstream from an impressive river. Following the river a ways up, I came to, well, what I can only describe as an explosion of greenery. This has to be some of, if not the densest bush I have ever seen. Although, it does seem, well, odd. Eucalypts and the sort don't usually grow this closely together. And the arid yet tropical nature of the surrounds would lead one to think that the most growth you'd find is short and dry. Glorified kindling. But this forest matches the descriptions of the great woods of northern Europe. even the Amazons. I'll have to find another way through. It's curious though. The wind that blows through here almost sounds like whispers. I'm sure that'll fuel the superstitions of the nearby natives. The 4th of April, 1818. I found a group of natives today. An untrusting bunch. They weren't overly fond of my being here and were predictably uncooperative. I suppose I can't blame them though. After so many clashes with outsiders, I can understand their standoffishness. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't frustrated. I didn't want anything but information, just a way through the forest. Yet they treated me like I was some sort of pillager. An inaccurate and unfair summation. That honour almost certainly goes to Cadell and his lot. Should Palmerston happen, these people will almost certainly be displaced. Reluctantly though, I admit that I am playing a part. I may not be the one building the city, but I'm still an integral role. If only things were simpler. If only everyone could get what they wanted, like in the picture books I read as a child. Oh well. Their English wasn't very good, and my understanding of their dialect was also subpar. But from what I could make out, there were repetitions of the words river and garcane. Such a difficult language to understand. Do not step, one of the men managed to get out, and then gestured to the forest, then gave an approximation of a thumbs up and pointed to the river. I sighed, but in thanks I offered him and the other natives a portion of my rations. From what I could understand, he was telling me that the forest is far too dense to cut through on foot. Rather, the only way through is by canoe. I'll see if I can trade for a canoe. Then, first thing, I'm going upstream. Of course, it had to be upstream. Damn you, Cadell. I bet your mother serves the crown on her back. The 6th of April, 1818. The river is far longer than expected. I've been having to moor the canoe and sleep in it so I don't get pushed back downstream. It's strange. I could very easily pull the canoe to shore and camp on solid ground, but there's something about the forest I can't quite place. I feel this dread deep inside when I look to the trees on either side of the river. I desperately do not want to step foot on the ground here. Daft, I know. But either way, I'll be completing my job, so where I sleep and how I sleep, I hardly think matters. My current state of mind, I blame on the wind. At night, it sounds clearly like people. Whispers and wails. I should like to bring a scientist back with me to study them. Perhaps it has something to do with the trees. Maybe the way the bark forms alters the sound of the wind. But, to be honest, these things, these hypotheticals I spew out, I just tell myself to cope. In truth, I'm petrified. I know God wouldn't allow for any devilish creatures to exist, but that childish part of my brain still needs convincing. The 12th of April, 1818. I feel like I'm not moving. Every day I row, and every day the river stretches out ahead of me. Barely any light gets through the canopy, and the water barely reflects what little light does get through, as it is so full of dirt that it's opaque. That's right, the water is opaque, for God's sake. Couldn't even drink it if I got thirsty. The whispers aren't just at night anymore. I hear them all day, every day. I can't tell if they're filling the forest or if they're following me. There are no birds or sounds of creatures playing in the leaves. There's just the whispers. Always the whispers. God, why won't they let me sleep? The 13th of April, 1818. I don't know how to start this entry. I keep rewriting it over and over and over again. No matter what, the words just won't come out right. I keep thinking I sound mad or stupid. I was fed up with the river. After so many days, I figured the natives must have made a fool of me. Perhaps this is a circular water system or something. There's no way I should still be in here. The whispers were so loud and constant. I just wanted to be away from them. Out in the open, in my little canoe, I felt so vulnerable. So I gave in. I pulled the canoe to shore and made footfall in the forest. And that's when it happened. The moment my foot hit the soil, the whispers, the wails, the speaking in the trees, the cacophony of sound stopped. Days of noise, then a wall of silence. My blood ran cold, and naturally I froze. I changed my mind and turned to run back to the canoe. And that's when I saw him. I only say him because the thing roughly resembled a man, but it was no human. He stood over me, towered actually. He seemed to reach into the trees on either side and above him. From his back, giant leathery wings sprouted, like that of a bat. I was horrified when they cracked out and reached for me. I stumbled backwards, narrowly dodging them. His body creaked and groaned like dry bark as he moved closer to me, wings arcing back to try and snatch me again. Despite my exhaustion, I threw myself up and ran for it, deeper and deeper into the forest. There was a tremendous, thunderous gust of wind that almost toppled me over as the thing behind me took to the sky in pursuit. What manner of godless creature was this? So I ran, panting hard, my throat burned with unexpected exercise. I manically scanned the forest around me for some clearing, some break. And as I did, I saw them, those who made the whispers. They were people, like me. Their bodies were blue and transparent. They didn't seem to notice me. They just shuffled about and wept. I made a quick prayer, but no salvation came. The monster landed in front of me. The force of his landing shook the ground and I fell tumbling. I screamed and thrashed as he effortlessly plucked me up with his wings and pushed me close to his chest, using those wings to almost crush me into it, smother me. I tried to scream again, but then these tendril-like things from his chest came out and forced their way down my open throat. For the first time in my life, I could feel the inside of my lungs as the tendrils traveled down my throat and probed around, blindly feeling around my insides. I felt my bones cracking and creaking under the pressure of the wings, and my vision grew dark as he sucked the life from me. It was over. I was over. But then, he stopped. I felt his body tense, and an inhuman voice barked. What? The voice was so nearly human that it made my insides turn. The monster sounded like one half of a conversation. You dare make demands of me? The tendrils withdrew, and I felt air rush back to me. Nadubi filth! The monster's voice boomed, and then he threw me away like an unwanted dolly. I don't remember what happened after that. Maybe I hit a tree. Maybe I was poisoned. Either way, the first thing I can remember is stumbling, battered, bruised, and exhausted out of the forest. This account shall remain with me, and only me. I'm smart enough to know that this will get me committed or worse if I bring it up. As for Palmerston, Cadell be damned. He can build his city somewhere else. I'll probably just find somewhere a few 100 miles from here and say that that's the perfect spot. I don't think I'll ever know what happened. But I'm lucky to be alive. His name is Garcane, the demon of the Liverpool River. Garcane is an interesting case. Not just a creature, but an evil spirit. He makes his home in the Liverpool River's surrounding bushland. For as long as tribes have existed around the area, they have told tales of hunters and travellers going into that forest, never to be seen alive again. Garcane kills all who enter his forest. But interestingly, he is not a hunter. Whilst his motives are unknown, it could be argued that he is a sort of protector figure. But is he protecting the forest, or something within it? Garcane stands at 12 feet tall. Vaguely humanoid, he has dark skin and massive bat-like leathery wings that sprout from his back. These wings are Garcane's primary weapon. He kills his victims by ensnaring them in his wings, and then using them to smother them to death. Whilst being killed by Garcane, he will tear out the soul of his victim, and then devour them, leaving nothing but bones. But one of the most fascinating things about Garcane is that he is not a soul eater. Either he tears out his victims' souls for flavour, or just to be cruel. You see, those souls torn out by Garcane are not consumed, and they do not pass on. Instead, all those who were killed by Garcane are doomed to wander his forest as a lost soul for all eternity. It is said that if you listen closely to the wind of the forest, you can hear the cries and wails of all those Garcane has killed. But why does this happen? Does Garcane curse them? Does contact with him leave some magical effect on the soul? Maybe. One other interesting idea that poses more questions than answers is that, in fact, the forest is the one that entraps Garcane's victims. Perhaps the forest itself is magical. So that brings us back to the biggest question of all surrounding Garcane. What is he? Hunter? Protector? Or is he trying to keep people away from the forest for their sake? At last, he found her. Her naked form sat upon a stone in the clearing ahead of him. He licked his lips. Her hair was made of fire, and its licking tongues of flame left no burns on her deep brown skin. In his head, he had imagined taking her back to the village. He had planned to claim her as his wife. But instead, he just sat in the bushes and watched, letting his eyes slowly trace along her thighs, working their way up to her breasts and her neck. She was a work of art, and all he wanted was to look. Her eyes were like golden, roaring embers. Staring into them was like looking at the sun. But there was no pain, no blindness. Just the very sight of her made his insides warm. Made him feel like he was swaddled in a heavy fur, despite the night air's chill. He fantasized about her pillowy lips, kissing them, sliding his palms along her skin. It looked smooth. So smooth. He was certain now. He would take her back to the village, and she would be his. But first, he just wanted to look. Just for a little longer. When they found him, he was sat in dense forest. Roots and grass had grown around and ensnared him. The more aggressive plants had grown through him, their little buds poking through his flesh, grotesquely blossoming. His hair was long and grey now, his skin leathery and wrinkled from decades of sunlight and age. But to those that found him, the strangest parts were his eyes. His pupils were a warm orange, and they glowed like dying embers, staring intently at something that had been gone for a very, very long time. It is said that her name is Juniper, and whilst her origins are generally unknown, it is believed that she has some relation to the bunyip. A daughter? Maybe a wife? Or perhaps just another of his species? It is unknown, like so much to do with Juniper. Some have even argued that the Devil Girl, as she is also referred, is in fact, in her own respect, a god. But whether or not you choose to believe that is, well, it's up to you. There are many creatures of lust across the world, nymphs and even the common succubus. But Juniper is something different, something far more lethal. Juniper doesn't just sing you to your doom or steal your soul. No. Her methods, and thus her motives, are far more elaborate. Unlike a succubus, Juniper doesn't change her form to fit in with what a man desires. Because, well, to put it bluntly, she is so beautiful in her natural state that no man can resist her. But regardless of her methods, the end result is the same. Once you gaze upon her and become inevitably infatuated, she will promise you the world. You are the man she has chosen. You are who she will love and care for all time. And she will be the mother of your children. Curiously, sometimes Juniper follows through on some of these promises. Well, in part. In one of her stories, Juniper does in fact follow through and marry a man. She even goes so far as to move with him to a new land to start their life together. But it would appear that the devil girl is just biding her time. She is waiting for, well, impregnation. And once she accomplishes this goal, whichever man she is with will wake to discover her missing. It would appear that she has vanished without a trace. Every time she is impregnated, Juniper will give birth to exactly 5 children. No more, no less. But why? Is she seeking out motherhood? Why is this always her primary goal? There are 3 theories surrounding this. Some argue that Juniper is not in fact a single entity, but rather a species. And this goal of hers is merely her reproductive cycle, how the species proliferates. The second, darker theory is that Juniper is cursed, an immortal, to walk the land for all eternity with one desire: children. She wants nothing more than to be a mother, to experience motherhood. But she is doomed to forever miscarry. She will never know what it is to have a child of her own. Lastly, and my personal favourite theory, is that this entire process is how Juniper feeds. Other temptress, succubus-type creatures are focused on the consumption of their victims' souls, either directly or indirectly. But Juniper, on the other hand, prefers to eat babies, specifically her babies. So this is all just her version of late-night takeaway. But whatever happens to the father, you may ask? Did you think that she leaves him in peace? And he returns to his life? No. Once you have fallen for Juniper, that's it. There's no coming back. From that point on, your only desire will be to find your long-lost love. At which point, one of 2 things will happen. Either you will, against all odds, find her again, at which point you will become entranced, staring at her beauty until the end of time, whilst your body slowly withers away to nothing. Or, after years of searching, finally, Juniper will return to you. And all she will have is one request. She will instruct you to go to the mountains, find a cave, and inside, take your own life. And of course, you will do so happily. Then all that is left for Juniper is to repeat this endless cycle and seek out a new, unsuspecting man. And that is the Australian devil girl, Juniper. Deadlier than a succubus, and far more beautiful.